Now tonight, we're going to have some fun. And we're going to look at all the cultural things that happened during the Cold War era and how they represented themselves in our own society. We are very lucky to have David and Stephen here with us tonight. And they mentioned to you just as we were starting what their background is and how they got to know each other and how they started collecting all the things that they did. Stephen is a managing director and curator, placing the objects in political context through the relative information of the text. And David has his lifelong collection of 200,000. I mean, we have over 20,000 items in this museum. So I don't know how he does that. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Peggy. You know, you're really lucky here. We go to a lot of museums across the country. We've been doing this for 10 years. I mean, we've been having fun for much longer than that. But we've been doing these museum exhibitions for the last 10 years, and we've really had a great time. We've gone to a lot of museum conferences, local and national as well. I want to say that this museum has been very accommodating, very supportive, and very welcoming to us. And so I want to thank Peggy, of course, but also the staff, Justin, Michael, Donna, and all the volunteers. I mean, you really are lucky to have a quality museum like this in your community. So I applaud you for your support. It's very rare that a museum won't have local, state, federal funding, and so that you're able to sustain and support this museum and a museum of this quality is really a testament to your commitment to knowledge and sharing and history and the importance of history. So thank you for the work that you've done to help the museum stay open, and thanks, Peggy, for inviting us. So I just want to say again, I'm Stephen, this is David, and we've been goofballs for many, many years. We have these exhibitions that we've developed, right? A number of exhibitions, and they've toured all over the United States. We were even at the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures, so you see us in different outfits depending upon the exhibition that we have. This was an exhibition called Monsters, Superheroes, and Villains, and that's one where we think about and talk about what the importance of the mythical characters of monsters, superheroes, and villains. Mostly they're coming from American iconography, so that'd be Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Doc Ock, Thor, all these characters that are so popular today. But also the backstory, that's the part that I like to tell. Dave still reads and buys a lot of comic books, and I'm really interested in the stories about where these creators came up with these ideas, how their ideas shifted and changed over the years to reflect the tensions and the stresses and the joys of the different times and different eras that we lived through. And so that's what we're doing with that particular exhibition. We're from the Twin Cities, and so we were lucky enough to have a feature article in a newspaper. We had our museum. It was selected, even among the big museums in our town. For some reason, the local weekly paper selected our exhibition, thinking the way we are contextualizing and celebrating pop culture and how we were reflecting on the importance of pop culture to help us understand our lived experience collectively and individually.
And it was the most fun exhibit of that year. I mean, let's get real. It was toys. It was fun.
So these are the different exhibitions that we tour. So we have one on Mary Shelley, Spies in Space is the one that we're going to be talking about tonight. Strange Creatures, that's one of David's favorites with the dinosaur and fantasy toys. And then I actually, after working with David for about 6 or 7 years, I started to wonder about what did it mean to collect? Because everybody I talked to were collecting something, thimbles or dolls or paper, napkins or menus from restaurants, matchbooks. Like there are a lot of things people collected, and I started to do a lot of research on collecting. And this exhibition is really, I think, interesting. And then it uses David as a model, and it uses his collection and uses his journey, where he got his inspiration, how his parents inspired him and allowed him to collect and things like that. But as a metaphor for what is the impulse for all of us to collect? What are we trying to save and preserve? And how each of us curate. If I would walk into any one of your homes and I would say, oh, what's that object? What's this object? Where did you get this? A lot of them are heirlooms, and I'm hearing stories. You're revealing a lot about your personal, your familial history and things like that. Plus, as Dave said, I always forget about the fun part. So Dave and I, you'll get the banter here. I'm very cerebral, and he's very much into the fun aspect of it. So we're going to play off each other quite a bit tonight. We'll go through a presentation. We were told you had 3.5 hours, so we're going to take a break in about 90 minutes, and then we'll get a drink of water real quick, and then we'll come back. But anyway, we're here tonight to talk about spies and space toys of the Cold War era.
Right, and so part of this journey that we haven't explained is we got the monster thing up and running, monsters, heroes, and villains, and he said, what else have you got in your collection you want to do?
Yeah, we haven't shown. What haven't we shown?
And I said, now, I was a child of the Bond era, okay? This was Bond mania, and Man from U.N.C.L.E., so I had just a veritable storage locker full of spy stuff, and I thought, well, spies, and then it hurt me. Oh, and space, like a lot of space toys too. Space was really big. In fact, remember when Apollo 11 was going to land on the moon and we were all just transfixed? So we came up with Spies in Space. And then he was the one that put it in the balanced context of, well, there's two stories here, you know? There's the American story, and then there's the Soviet Union story. And that's what you're going to see in our lecture tonight, is the balance between what we were doing and what they were doing, which, of course, as a small child, I had no clue, right? I just went, what? So,
well, yeah, I didn't either, but that's the beauty of looking back at our lives. They don't make sense while we're living them. But you look back and all of a sudden you're, oh, that's why that happened, you know? But the other thing that happened, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is that after World War II, there was a lot of tension between the so-called Allied nations that helped end World War II, right? And part of that was rocketry, right? Because the missiles and the rocketry that were being advanced by the Germans, like, we were lucky that Oppenheimer and crew or et al. Were the ones that were able to get those bombs dropped. Now, I'm not a fan of what happened, but that's the way the war stopped, and that actually stopped, because if that rocketry that those scientists had in Germany, in Nazi Germany, would have eclipsed us, the whole world that we're living in would be very different today. So that being said, we have this rocketry race, right? After World War II, a lot of the Soviets went in and plucked the scientists, the engineers that were working on rocketry from the Nazis, and the Americans did the same. And that was part of, right? But they weren't either not, the ones that came to America pled their allegiance to America, right? And they helped us with rocketry. But what else was happening? The world was terrified of nuclear war, because suddenly they saw the destructive force of the nuclear bombs. And so we had this space race, which was in part just about unifying a country, about technological achievement, things like that. But it was also about how can we actually advance our rocketry in order to defend and or have a proactive strike against our enemies, right? And so the two superpowers, the Russians, the Soviets, and the US, really started to sort of amp up that tension there, right? And that was because of all that rocketry. And I'm sure when we get to questions and answers, you know, Dave and I we do these talks a lot, and we don't really let all the details of the facts get in the way of a good story. So we apologize for those of you out there that know way more than we do about some of this stuff, but we're gonna kind of skip along the surface, and then at the end you can raise your hand, take notes, and then you can tell us about things that are more detailed and nuanced in the facts than we know. But I think that's a part of what happened after World War II, is there was this real concern about who's gonna have nuclear weaponry, and what does that mean, and what does that mean for world domination? And of course, ideological. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but Dave's gonna tell us a little bit about this exhibition.
yeah, so when we started putting the exhibition, I started going through like multitudes of toys, and they're all upstairs when you come to see the exhibit later. Not all of them, but the ones that cried loudest to me. They all go, well, take me. I want to be in the show. Please don't miss me. I'm a space toy. I'm a robot. I'm a monster guy. And so it was everywhere, you know, from a card game to a giant 39-inch robot, from robots that walked to basically, you know, James Bond briefcases that had knives that came out, and like that if you open it up wrong, the caps. Remember who remembers caps? Cap guns. Cap guns, right? Well, when you opened up the James Bond briefcase wrong, bang, 2 caps went off, because that was it From Russia with Love, remember? And it was just like everything they were trying to do was emulating for a small boy. I was a kid, you know, like I want to be a spy, I want to be James Bond, and then the astronaut thing was really technological. I wouldn't know how to fly a spacecraft, but I sure would like want to see monsters and aliens. The other crazy thing about this time that I'll just not go on too long is prior to this time, since I've been collecting a lifetime, the 50s I like to think was a time of like cowboys and Indians and sort of Daniel Boone and detectives. And then suddenly along comes James Bond. And that just changed, and also monsters and superheroes. And that changed sort of the face of toy collecting at a 90-degree angle for me. And I just kept collecting, and luckily my parents, bless their hearts, they just let me keep it all. And they just never said no. They said, oh, well, you need the whole series. Oh, wait, you need all the guys. Wait, you need every color of every guy. And so that's what happened. So, yeah. And so here's some of the fun stuff you're gonna see. Again, like, this was an early present of mine. I didn't like it too much because all it does is it goes around and a little astronaut pops out. Like, where's the monster? Where's the cool stuff? That guy's Mr. Atomic. Very early Christmas present because, again, every grandparent goes, what does he want? Well, he likes robots. And who remembers models that you put together?
Yeah.
Remember? With airplane glue? Well, Aurora was a big company back then that usually worked with ships and race cars and airplanes and that kind of stuff. And then with the Monster Revolution, they started producing character models. And this is the box for the James Bond model. So yeah, so it was a great time to be a kid and a great time to collect toys because there seemed like there was toys of every shape, size, and form.
So one thing that I'll just mention here too, this is a little Sputnik card from this card game, this space race card game. So this little Sputnik card, right? So when we played the cards, we actually were learning social and political ideology and values as we were going through this. So here you'll recognize here the CIA, KGB, the MI6, and of course we have to have Spy versus Spy. That was how many remember Spy versus Spy? A lot of tongue-in-cheek, you know, and if you go back and read them, they're actually very poignant and very relevant today. But here you see the two so-called superpowers, the two dominant economic powers, and they had very different ideologies, right? One was about socialism or a version of communist socialism in which we saw everything was owned by the government, and then things were kind of parsed out and people were working for the government without pay and things like that. And we had capitalist ideology, right? And these two ideologies were not in sync at all, and in fact wanted to trump each other or destroy each other, right? And that's really where a lot of this tension came from. So when Dave's talking about Bond, here we're going to hear about Ian Fleming. Now you all know the story. Why don't you tell the story of Ian Fleming, where he came from,
So
and
Ian Fleming,
what he did during World War II.
he was born in about 1908, okay, and he went to Eton first, okay, but he was kicked out because he wore too much hair oil, he had a car, and he had relations with women. And they kicked him out. And then his mom sent him to a boarding college in Switzerland, and it was run by an ex-British spy and his novelist wife. Imagine that. He gets out of that, and it's still early days. He tries to be a banker, tries to be a reporter, nothing's happening. Along comes World War II, and he gets taken into naval intelligence. This is where he becomes who he would become. So in naval intelligence, suddenly he's in charge of, like, basically he becomes in charge of a thing called, I think it was called Commando 30, which was special op guys that would go either in before or right after and try and get as many documents and information out so that they could beat the Nazis. One of his famous ones was, he had a great idea. He said, well, let's get a dead body, dress it as an airman, put fake documents in it, and then we'll drop it over Nazi Germany with a bad parachute, and they'll think it's like a real deal. And that never seemed to come to pass, but a lot of his stuff was used, and he used all those ideas once he got out of the war and then became a novelist. He basically went to Jamaica and wrote his books, and Casino Royale was published in '52. Dr. No, who's seen Dr. No, the first Sean Connery? Okay, Dr. No comes out in '62, sorry, and in '61 what happens is, who remembers John F. Kennedy? Okay, well, in John F. Kennedy, I don't know if you've heard this story, they interviewed John F. Kennedy, who was quite popular, and they say, well, what are your 10 favorite novels? And he mentions From Russia with Love.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, every American had to go out and buy From Russia with Love and became a James Bond fan. And then Dr. No comes out after that, and the rest is history, and Ian Fleming dies an early death because he drank and smoked, he smoked like 2 packs a day and drank a bottle of gin every day and died early. And yeah, and because the Bond phenomena, Bond mania was everywhere, of course TV goes, hey, wait a minute, hang on. And so they produced The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Anybody remember The Man from U.N.C.L.E.? There you go, all right. And so The Man from U.N.C.L.E. comes out, and the story is he got more fan mail than Clark Gable. This is
He being Elia Kiriakou.
David McCallum,
David
right?
McCallum.
David McCallum. And so, and it was like, it's very innocent feeling now. When I watch it now, I go, wow. As a kid, I loved it. It seemed like true stories, like real life. But now it's very fun.
1 second, Dave. So, who remembers what TV show David McCallum was on recently?
NCIS.
What is it?
NCIS.
Okay, so now you know, and he recently died just late last year. Okay, Dave, keep going.
And then, so what we got going on here, like, this is a series of really cool guys I love because they have all these, they're upstairs when you go to the exhibit, they're from Marx. Marx was a toy company from
Pennsylvania.
and they did a lot of great toys. They made that Big Lou character as well. And they were just great, phenomenal at making plastic toys. There was a series of paperback books, there was a series of comic books, and they even had a couple of feature-length movies, and they made some repeats. And then, because Spies are spies, there's even more spies. So this is Honey West, and she's like the first, she's a quasi-private detective American spy that took assignments. And it was never quite explained to my small brain, like, well, and she had a pet leopard, pet ocelot, sorry. And she was one of the first spies on TV after Man from U.N.C.L.E. And then, anybody know the Avengers series with Diana Rigg? Okay, so then they dropped Honey West because ABC got the Avengers series and put it on TV. And then, because The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was such a popular show, they got the girl from U.N.C.L.E., right? April Dancer. And so, again, and then another one I was thinking about, I just mentioned, can I mention this? Is then they thought, well, wait, Westerns are really popular, spies are really popular. Who remembers Wild Wild West?
Yeah.
And that was a Western spy movie, post-Civil War times. I mean, like, so spies can invade any genre because, you know, who doesn't like, you know, duplicity and sort of plots and backstabbing and, you know, femme fatales. And then, of course, once spies become... We're all laughing. There you go. See, that's exactly it. Once spies become so stereotypic and so ubiquitous and so everywhere, then we can make fun of those spies. You know, it's not so serious. So we've got Get Smart, remember? Yep. Okay. And anybody remember Mel Gibson? Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks. Well, Mel Brooks was one of the early writers on Get Smart. And then, who remembers Boris and Natasha? See? We can make fun of this stuff once we go, I mean, even as a kid, you go, oh, I get it, okay, there we go. And then...
So what was interesting at the same time, so after working with David on his collection and mining his collection and starting to arc the stories and tell the stories about, okay, we had rocketry and we had, you know, nuclear rocketry and science, and then we also had the space race that was coming along, I started to wonder what was going on behind the Iron Curtain. Because it's not in his collection. Now, I wouldn't expect it to be, because it was very hard to get information or anything from behind the Iron Curtain, and anything we got was propaganda, right? It was about, everything was, you know, lovely and flowers and beautiful. What I found is, I actually in Minnesota, not too far from where we live, is the Museum of Russian Art, and it's the only museum of Russian art in America, right? There are other ones, but this one actually is the largest one. There's one in San Francisco as well that's a little bit smaller. And I spoke with the curator there. She grew up in Stalingrad, in St. Petersburg, and she said that they didn't really have spies in pop culture when she was growing up. And she couldn't explain why, because just like us, we don't really understand our childhoods, right? But one of the reasons why I speculate, because I kept doing research on this, is that because it's a surveillance society, I suspected that they didn't want to call attention to how much they were being surveilled or surveilling each other, because they were normalizing that, right? So what we see here are some examples of where spies did show up during the Cold War era in pop culture, but these were often, you know, the Soviets, if you read Soviet history or Russian history, they think that because of the second front, right, the Russian front, and they lost 1 million people. They think that they were instrumental in winning the war, and the Nazis losing. That's what they think, okay? And so they have these pop culture movies. These are feature films. Their film centers were in Ukraine and Yugoslavia. And they celebrate the spies that were going on to help, in their eyes, end World War II. Okay? And then these are film strips that are talking about, they, of course, propaganda, demonized Americans. So what they're saying here is, anywhere you go, there could be Americans infiltrating your country, right? And so these we have these 8mm films that are upstairs in the exhibition that you can't see the films themselves, but you can see the reels, okay? So this is how they portrayed spies, right? It wasn't James Bond and heroic and all that kind of stuff. It was more about either demonizing the West, or it was about celebrating how they were unheralded outside of their own country. So, you know, it's just like anything with history, you have to hear the facts and then you make up your own opinion about that. But of course, we have this Soviet, this space race, right? The Soviets and the US. So here's the US Apollo and here's the Soyuz, right? And they're looking to dock in 1975. So this is what was going on with these superpowers. And Kennedy and Khrushchev actually spoke a lot, right? And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Here's Laika. Laika was the first dog in space, right? When David and I started, I grew up in America. I thought we had all the firsts, right? I thought we were the first at everything. I really didn't know. Yuri Gagarin, the first person and human in space to survive. Now, Laika didn't survive. Laika went up and died of heat exhaustion up there. And these are the other, here's the Sputnik, right? And so then here's Soyuz. So these are the different generations. And here's Tereshkova, Valentina Tereshkova, hardcore Putinite right now, and is in the Duma. Is it called Duma? Duma. She's in the Duma. She's like a parliamentary person alive still, celebrated as the first woman in space in her own country. Not really well known outside of the Soviet Union or Russia. But these were some of the first that were happening, and Kennedy was like, hey, wait a minute. We've got engineering and we've got all these rocket scientists, and we really need to come together. We have a lot of divisiveness culturally. We've got this hippie movement and the Beats and all these people with these different ideas about what our society could be and should be. And there's a lot of that conversation. We've got the end of the Korean War segueing into the Vietnam War, and there's a lot of tension there about what those values are and who's upholding American values and what are those. And so he wanted to unify us around this idea of let's come together on one big idea, right? They call it today, anytime you have a big idea that you're trying to, if any of you have kids or grandkids in college or high school, they talk of the moonshot, right? What's your moonshot? They always talk about that on social media. And this is where that term comes from, is this idea of having a big idea that brings all these people together for a unified vision. And this is where Kennedy came in. Well, what only recently came about is the Kennedy and Khrushchev. So many of you likely are parents, but also many of you might be vets. Many of you might be people who are in the theater business, where you come together for a short period of time, work very intensely, and then you go your separate ways. And you have that shared tension, right? So that anxiety about being a parent, and you bond with other parents. How do you do this? How do you? And nobody knows. Nobody knew what it felt like, except for Khrushchev and Kennedy, that have the power to destroy the world. No one knew that but those two, and they actually bonded around that. And there's a play that was written called Love Letters in the Cold War, about these letters that are in the Kennedy Library in Boston. You can go down and see them. But they really developed a very close bond, and they actually spent a lot of time together. And so one of the things that happened was that they were at a dinner in Austria, and Jackie Kennedy was sitting next to Khrushchev. This was maybe 1961, maybe 5 or 6 dinners into their allegiance. Now, they were still competitive. They still believed in their respective countries and their respective ideologies. So they weren't endorsing each other, but they had that shared stress of having their finger on the so-called button. So Jackie Kennedy's sitting next to Khrushchev, running out of small talk, and Caroline tells the story in her memoirs. She says, hey, I heard Belka and Strelka, the two dogs that you sent to space who did survive and come back, I heard those two dogs came back and Strelka had puppies. And Khrushchev said, well, yes she did. And Jackie says, well, you know, Jack Kennedy's son, right, and Jacqueline Kennedy's son, has his own terrier, but Caroline Kennedy doesn't have a dog. And Khrushchev says, oh, I'll send you a dog. I'll send you one of Strelka's puppies, and here are the diplomatic papers. They flew over a single dog in a single plane with an escort. And here are the diplomatic papers that Pushkinkin came over with. And here's Pushkinkin on the White House lawn. And this photo is from the JFK Library. And when I learned this story, I thought, these are things that I didn't understand or know about how I grew up. Right? That people who are ardent enemies can also have empathy for each other. And I thought it was such a beautiful and compelling story. So much empathy that they could actually go to that human level of taking care of each other's children. Right. I thought it was really beautiful. I wrote to the JFK Library and I said, hey, we're doing this exhibition, Spies in Space, Toys of the Cold War Era. Can we use this photo in our exhibition and tell that story? And they said, of course. So next time you go down there, thank them for us, because it's been really fun to explore this idea of how we navigate a world where we have different ideologies, different ways of thinking and being, and looking back at history and seeing examples of how we can actually work together, even with those opposing viewpoints. So Dave's going to talk a little bit about how then the space race started to show up in pop culture.
Right, and so now what's amazing here is we've got the Alan Shepard figure upstairs, and guess who you got over on the board right there?
Yep.
Alan Shepard, there you go. So he was the first man in space. Now, I probably wasn't paying enough attention at that time. That was pretty early days for me. But John Glenn, I can remember him going into space, and model rockets, I had friends that had much better fine motor control, and so they could put together all these rockets, and they were great model makers. And so I was in constant awe of them, and they can make, who remembers rockets that you set off like it went up into the sky? Remember that?
Right.
Estes rockets? Anybody have one of those when they were a kid? Yeah, a few of you. I mean, it was like, now they'd probably call somebody and say you were getting in trouble, but rockets were huge, and space was huge, because when all that opened up and we were going out into the orbit and the outer atmosphere, anything was possible. What are we going to find? Who are we going to find? What are they going to bring back? And it was just like Pandora's box of fantastic imagination. And that's what I was living through.
So before we go on, many of you know this, and Dave will remember too, he did a lot of research on these characters, these people, right? After World War II, who's seen the Wright stuff or read the book, right? There's a lot of documentation on what was going on in NASA just after World War II and up through the late 50s and into the early 60s at the beginning of the NASA Apollo programs, etc. These people were fighter pilots in World War II. Some of them in Korean War, but some in World War II. And they were so insulted when they had to sit in a tin can and do nothing. It was such an insult to their skills and their ability, but they were trained to deal with G-forces, they were trained to go up in space, they were trained to, not outer space, but they were trained to deal with the physical and the psychological toll that kind of work takes, right? If any of you have friends that are firefighters, EMTs, first responders, police officers, that's a stressful thing. And those of you that have you have your little community, so they have the right stuff. They have their little clan of people that didn't understand what it was that they were going through. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about that segue from being a fighter pilot to being an astronaut.
The other thing that you can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, is that when I was a kid, fighter pilots and early astronauts were like the real life heroes. They were the guys that were in the paper that your parents would go, oh, they break the sound barrier, they go this fast. I mean, they were doing the stuff that was heroic stuff. And they could easily die. Even I understood that. If you were flying a plane at a gajillion miles an hour, it could go horribly wrong. And they all came down, yeah. And then, of course, as the progression goes, then suddenly we're into the Apollo program. And the Apollo program was sort of where I started paying attention as a kid, because now we're doing more than just going fast, we're actually going to go to the moon. And Neil Armstrong becomes the big hero of the decade, really. The first man to get to the moon. And so there was so much moon paraphernalia, not just toys, but there was books. He was on the cover of Time magazine. There was sort of like, sort of ephemeric souvenirs and memorabilia and all that kind of stuff. It was like bigger than Princess Diana's wedding, it was like everywhere. I mean, you could get commemorative plates and pins and then there's more toys, of course, because once we get there, or once we almost get there, you've got Walter Cronkite explaining it. Anybody remember Walter Cronkite? Yes. Okay, he was the news, for anybody that doesn't, he was the voice of the nation on CBS News every at 5, I think. And so he would tell you that's the way it is. Right. And so he was again explaining how all this was going to happen during the Apollo series on TV. And meanwhile, you're a kid and you've got these kind of models in front of you. There's a model that's in the exhibit. That's, I don't know which astronaut, but it's an Apollo astronaut. And then again, there's one of my early toys that was exciting, but not that exciting because it didn't do anything except spin around and make noise. But so it inspired thousands of toys. And now here's just the beginning of the not so fantastic toys. This is real life.
So what happened? Did anybody remember what these two units are? How that worked? So they went up together and they separated. And this one is this one, right? This one is the one that landed on the moon, right? And this one had who in it, Dave?
Collins. A guy, an astronaut named, help me out, first name, Mike Collins. Mike Collins kind of, in my opinion, the unsung hero, just because, except that he's the guy that went around the dark side of the moon and was like out of touch probably, maybe for the first
28
time.
minutes, yeah.
Yeah, and just like, what happened to him?
So what happened is these separated, this one landed, he's going around the dark side of the moon, no communication with ground, with mission control. He's back there and doesn't know what's going on. They didn't know if the moon was solid or not. They weren't 100% sure. They thought this thing could be so heavy it would just sink like quicksand into the moon. So he's going around the moon thinking, I wonder if I'm going to see them when I come back around, And he can't talk to anybody. Right?
All alone.
And so finally he comes back around and then everything's fine. But he, like Dave said, he's just like the chauffeur. Everybody else is going to the Met Gala and he's the chauffeur, So anyway, that was his deal. The thing that I think is interesting about how we'll stay with this for a second and we'll get into that, what I was going to say here. Go ahead, Dave.
So like I said, we had the real toys, the real thing, the command modules and the lunar module and the rockets. And then, of course, TV just takes that as a diving board and leaps into fantasticness. And who remembers Lost in Space? Anybody here? All right, that's the Robinson family.
Who's this? Who knows?
Annie, there you go.
Okay, who's this? Uh-oh.
Commander West. Yeah, and that's Judy.
Our friend, this is our friend. Dr. what?
Smith.
Yeah, Dr. Smith. He sabotages the spaceship so that they crash on the planet. He was a stowaway.
He's a spy.
And we don't know what country he's from, but he didn't speak American like the rest of these people. He spoke English, but with a thick accent.
Yeah, there's June Lockhart from Lassie, remember? The supermom, always a supermom. Bill Mummy, he's still doing stuff. And Guy Williams, who previously had been Zorro. There you go, for Disney. And so Lost in Space pops up because, again, Swiss Family Robinson, that was a big hit, and that was a classic. So now we've got these guys stranded on another planet. Every week was another new trauma. And then Irwin Allen, who made that show, also made, anybody know? Voyage.
I have a submarine.
There you go, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And that's the Seaview and the flying sub. And so Irwin Allen got his start in TV in the 60s making these fantastic, colorful, action-filled family, I won't say family, but I loved them as a kid, but my parents watched them, they were great. There was lots of action, there was just and there were endless aliens, endless undersea monsters, endless spies, endless catastrophe. And speaking of that, then Irwin Allen goes on to become the maestro of sort of disaster movies. His first big movie is Poseidon Adventure. Everybody remember that? And then Towering Inferno. There you go. So he goes,
Shelley
wow.
Winters, yeah.
Yeah. So Irwin Allen is again, I just think, an unsung hero of 60s TV because they're kind of kitschy and but they're good.
All right, so then we have of course we've got Star Trek as TV starts to look at space exploration, right? So Star Trek had a completely different way of looking at things than from Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon go out, kill things that are gonna kill us, and Star Trek's going out and saying, you live differently than we do. Maybe that's something we should think about. You know, they were very kind of passive and humanistic, but they also were kind of cool because they had this guy who was half human and half Vulcan, right? And they had a very multiracial cast. It was very unusual, and here you can see Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura in what is purported to be one of the first interracial kisses on national television. So that's this here. It wasn't technically, but it's the one that everyone remembers.
And then I have to add to this, Gene Roddenberry, who pitched this, right? He pitched it, I think, to everybody, like CBS, and you know who picked it up? Who said, that sounds like a good idea? Lucille Ball. Desilu Productions said, we'll run with it. And one of the ways he was pitching it was because previously he'd been writing Western episodes. So he says, it's going to be Wagon Train in space. Well, it was a lot more than that, but I just think, he was trying to simplify it for the executives. Go, I don't understand.
And Roddenberry was actually dating Nichelle Nichols. And he had put her in a different TV show as just a bit actor. They fell in love and they were dating. They didn't get married, but they were dating. She had been a Broadway actress, Nichelle Nichols, and she had also traveled with Cab Calloway and Duke Ellington. She was a singer and a dancer, and she loved the stage, the Broadway stage. But she was doing this because, like all artists, you go where you can get a check, right? I mean, you have to have 5 or 6 different jobs, and so she took this gig. After 1 year, she's decided, I miss the stage. I miss the smell of the grease paint and the roar of the crowd, so I want to get back to the stage. And so this show was very popular. And she was one of the first black women in America on television who wasn't a maid or a servant or a cleaning lady or something like that, right? She was a dignified, on the deck, like an officer in Star Trek. Kind of a big deal. NAACP invited her to be the keynote speaker at that gala after the first season. And so she's sitting there and she's just like, oh God, I eat this rubber chicken. And she's up on the stage. She gets a tap on her shoulder from one of the organizers. And they said, sorry, Ms. Nichols, but somebody wants to speak with you. And in her autobiography, she says she takes a deep sigh and she thinks, oh, another Trekkie. And she stands up and turns around and looks right in the face of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Shake hands. She tells, he says, thank you for your show. It's really wonderful. And she says, oh yeah, I love it, but I kind of miss the stage. And he says, well, you're an artist. You do it, your heart, speaks to you. I mean, you have the luxury of following what your heart is. But I just want you to know one thing. Yours is the only show I let my daughters watch on television. So do what you will. What did she end up doing? Working with NASA. Stayed with the franchise, TV, went into the movies, and started to help NASA recruit and diversify from all the fighter pilots from World War II and the Korean War into what? Engineers, scientists, PhDs, right? Because these fighter pilots, they weren't PhDs. They couldn't do the scientific experiments that were going to help us advance scientifically of what was going on, to learn more about space. Could we live in space? So that's what Nichols, her contribution was in this. And so these are some of the first 3. These were for the space shuttle. These 3 black guys, I'm black guys, but Dr. Brandon McNair, I mean, these people have PhDs. I don't have PhDs. I shouldn't be so casual with them. And Fred Gregory, he was actually a fighter pilot, and he was a fighter pilot too, but he was a scientist. But then you see, this is what became of her work. This is how her work ended up showing up and making the fictional world that she lived became real life. And then for those of you that are the next generation of Star Trek, then the real world then started to be reflected again in the pop culture, right? So there's this really interesting loop, this reinforcing loop that's going on. And then we have some Soviet toys. Again, space was huge, Spies not so much. So you see all these different, here we got these, all these things are upstairs. We got this science book. Here's a Yuri Gagarin, kind of a celebratory toy. I saw this toy, and because I was looking for things to augment our exhibition, it goes beyond what David's collection contained. And I was searching around on eBay, I was searching around on collector sites for Soviet stuff, and this came up, and I thought, God, that's really a cool looking thing. But I don't want to spend $80 on a little plastic thing just because it has Cyrillic alphabet on it. Like, I don't know. I did some research. It turns out that it was the first remote-controlled robot in space. Just like they had the first dog in space, they had the first woman, the first man in space, they had the first remote control thing in space. Then when I wondered, as I was doing this research and discovered that, I learned that Richard Garrett, son of an astronaut, NASA astronaut, lived in Austin, Texas. He made millions in game design in the early 90s. 91 comes around, Soviet Union collapses, and some of you might remember that at that time, a lot of people rushed in and bought stuff. Trains, planes, military stuff. He went over there because his father was in NASA, and so he was collecting space stuff. So he went over there and started to ask around. They thought, well, we got this thing in the closet, we never went up, it was a Sputnik, you want that? So he bought a Sputnik that had never gone to outer space. He bought a couple of space suits, and then he said, well, what else you got around here? I mean, this is unbelievable to think, you know, as far as like how things happen. And they said, well, we've got this thing that landed on the moon. Do you want to buy it? And he goes, sure, I'll buy it. You know, and he goes, well, you can have the land it sits on too. Okay, I'm going to come back to that story, the story later. So Richard Garrett, an individual, not a company, not a country, an individual owns, this is the toy, obviously, but the real, you can look this up yourself, Lunahold, it's called. Okay, then Dave's going to talk a little bit about what happened with the outer space as we started to learn and think more about outer space.
Right, so as we said before, it was kind of like it went from, you had realistic toys, and then suddenly the boom is on. Who could create the funnest, most unrealistic and imaginative toys? So, anybody know Major Matt Mason? There you go. He came out from Mattel, and so that was almost like an entire series. This is pre-Lego having series. He had a space base, he had like 4 or 5 different vehicles, and then he also had friends that hung out with him, like a whole bunch of other astronauts, and these are like Gumby guys. They got wired, they're rubber and wire. And then, because that was such a big hit, then Colorforms, if you remember Colorforms, which was another press and stick thing, they actually broke out of their box and they came out with their own series of spacemen, which were amazing because I always thought, well, he's kind of boring. But you know, you get a guy with wings and you get a guy that looks like that. That's Electron Plus from Pluto, and that's Captain Comet from Venus. And well, yeah. And so they were all buddies, and they would have their own space opera.
Don't tell them something they already know, Dave.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. And so again, the fantastic just follows along. As soon as they go, well, if that's working, we know kids like monsters, aliens, and robots, and all that kind of stuff. And so then there's robots. So again, robots have been around probably since the beginning of imagination, but suddenly in the 60s, to me at least, because I was a kid, they blossomed. So right here we have Mr. Atomic, again, an early Christmas present, and he lit up and he did all this goofy stuff, and he just like spun around in weird little circles, but at least he spun around and seemed like a guy. So I really liked him. And then here's Big Lou, our friend from the moon, from Mark's Toys. And so Big Lou is 39 inches tall. He was pretty amazing if you're a kid. And what was amazing is all the stuff he did. That was a compass, that was a missile launcher, there's his moon grenade, and he could fling that with his claw arm, and he'd bend over at the waist and he could pick it up again, because he had a little doohickey in his shoulder there. And then right there at his belly button, oh that one, okay, right there, there's a little thing and you could shoot ping pong balls out of his arm. Right at his belly button, that was a squirt gun. He's got, right at his chest, those are darts that come out of his nipples. And then you keep going. And so like, right in his smile, there was a little crank in the back, and I don't know, I still wouldn't figure out how it works. It was, I am Big Luke, your friend from the moon. I mean, it was true. And then you've got his eyes light up, and then there's a periscope in his head, and then the other thing is there's a little clicker in the back, and there, of course, I was terrible, I couldn't do this, a little Morse code thing, like Boy Scouts had, right? And you could click, 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 click. You could make clicking sounds and communicate with your friends, which I wasn't good at. But yeah, and it rolls, too. He's got wheels under his feet. So it's an amazing toy, kind of a holy grail toy, because for some reason nobody saved him. But, and then just about the time that those astronauts and those rubber bendy guys came out, Ideal came out with another series of robots called Zeroids. And that was a really great series, and they all did something, and they all had personalities, of course, in my opinion. And that's Zobar the Bronze. And so then, and they just came out with a whole new incredible series, and so they played all well together, and everybody had fun.
So what year is this, Dave?
That would be like early 60s. This is probably like 62, 63.
And then Zeroids?
Zeroids, that'd be like 67. And this guy's probably going to be 63.
Yeah. So then we get to Star Wars. Familiar, right? The legacy continues. Lucas, we all know, right? A sequential art museum underway in Los Angeles, right? Maybe sinking into the tar pit. We don't know what's happening with it, but something's happening, and he is an amazing visionary. He had made science fiction films before this one. What other movie, does anybody know what other movie he had directed?
It was a big break movie.
American Graffiti. Oh. American Graffiti was done by Lucas, right? So he was able to bankroll the Star Wars franchise, but he was very unsatisfied with
THX 1138.
Which was his early sci-fi.
Experimental thing he did.
It was the early sci-fi film he did, and it was very flat, two-dimensional. We're going to go to space, we're going to conquer and blow stuff up, and we're going to fly home. And it didn't really do very well. It was just sort of a generic kind of show. And he was really satisfied. He wanted to have the characters have more dimensionality, right? Have more backstory, more purpose. And so, does anybody know who Joseph Campbell is? Okay, tell us a little bit about Joseph Campbell. On the spot, pop quiz, go ahead.
He talks about cultures and he talks about history.
Right, so he was an anthropologist, kind of like Margaret Mead, and what he did is he studied the stories that people told all over the world. And he started to synthesize those stories into thematic stories. What were the stories, the creation stories, the origin stories, the hero's journey? You've heard of that? That came really he coined that phrase, right? Because he started to look universally at all the different indigenous and developed countries around the world and what stories they told, and he started to put those together. His most early and most famous book in the mid-50s was called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. But this idea, so if you think about Luke, of course, it's the hero's journey. Going out, discovering, battling, meeting new people, meeting strange people different than you, but then the ones that you actually like and you don't want to change them, right? It's similar to what was going on in Star Trek as well. And so that's the two of them. So Lucas was influenced by Campbell. And a fun side note here, the Force, does anybody know where that term, the Force, may the Force be with you, you know what that was referencing? Anybody know what that was referencing? You know that phrase, right? Yeah. May the Force be with you. So Lucas was into meditation as well. And the Force is like that, being grounded and being centered, right? And so you can start to see that. So these are the various influences that helped him start to think about this 9-picture vision of these very complex characters going on very complex journeys. And we started to see then the diversification of the different characters in here. The elder person that was, a little bit of a renegade that was helping this young charge that's going out in the world. And then, of course, don't kiss your sister and things like that, and be afraid of your father, always be afraid of your father, these kind of messages.
Back a second, and remember when Star Wars came out, nobody knew it was going to be a hit. Nobody had a clue. Yeah. And so Kenner, which had bought the rights to Star Wars, kind of, okay, yeah, well, all right.
Reluctantly, yeah.
I mean, it was cheap. Nobody knew. And then suddenly the movie was a smash hit. And so Kenner is suddenly backpedaling. So what they did the first Christmas is they sold gift certificates to the toys that weren't available. Oh my. So imagine you're a kid going, I want Luke Skywalker, And you get a gift certificate that says, you get a Star Wars figure.
In 6 months if you're lucky.
If you're lucky. And so it changed the face of toy collecting in a weird way, because suddenly the idea of having the entire series, I mean, that was always there, but suddenly this was a new frontier for, I want them all. I gotta have every guy in the series, and I gotta have the cantina, and I gotta have the Millennium Falcon, I gotta have, the chessboard or whatever it's called, all that stuff. Suddenly, we all had to have everything. And that's when I could have walked, I was in college at this time, or I could have walked away. I said, yeah, I'm too old for this stuff. I said, no, I gotta keep collecting. It's more exciting now. There's more guys than ever before. And there were monsters too.
And we're all the beneficiary of him continuing to collect. All right, so now where are we today? What's going on? The future of spies in space today. Okay, we know what's happening, right? This is happening, right? We know that the Pentagon is using doing a micro satellites rather than 1 or 2 big satellites. They're doing a mesh, they call it, that's going to encircle the Earth so we can keep track of everything. And then we've got these bases, these lunar bases that they're planning for the moon. Part of that is because it's going to be a wayside rest for deeper galaxy research, right? And then as far as energy goes, you're familiar with fusion, right? And then the byproduct is radioactive, right? If you use helium-3 is abundant on the moon, and the byproduct of helium-3 is not radioactive. And this professor's now emeritus, so he's retired, but this professor actually has been working on this since about the mid-late 1960s, and they've actually experimented with moon dust that was brought back. And they found that there is at current energy use levels in the world globally today, there's 1,000 years worth of energy with this helium-3 if they can get it at scale. Okay, so you'd have to have all these micro little generators around. So they're still working on it, and there are many governments as well as many individual companies, kind of like you think about SpaceX and Blue Horizon, as well as NASA and all the different countries, are still developing this technology, but there's hope that we can get to a zero net carbon future. And here we have the Artemis Accords. So you're familiar with the idea of international waters, right? That no one owns the international waters. Countries own or have rights to the waters that are on the borders of their countries. And then with regard to Antarctica, no one can really own Antarctica, right? So the Artemis Accords are an update of the accords that were developed in the mid-late 60s when the Soviets and the US were vying for advancement. There was something called the Space Treaty. And all these countries signed the Space Treaty except for who? Guess. Soviets, yeah, Russia, and didn't sign, China didn't sign. Now China didn't really have it on their radar at the time. But now here we have the Artemis Accords. Artemis Accords are an update of that. We see NASA here, we see all these Australian, Japan, Luxembourg, India, UK, all these other space agencies from around the world are joining this Artemis Accord. And our NASA, the new, we have the Apollo, the Gemini, all these different missions. Our new series of missions are called the Artemis missions. So an Artemis, I believe, is, who knows mythology? I think it's the brother of Apollo. Oh good, no one's going to correct me. Okay, let's just say it is. But somebody can Google it real quick and tell us when we're doing Q&A. So the Artemis Accords are the idea is that, much like Star Trek, you're going to be able to go out to space, for example, mine helium-3 on the moon, kind of step around that little spaceship that guy has up there. What's interesting about that, remember I told you about that remote control? Okay. The Space Accord, the Space Treaty from the 60s and the Artemis Accords both say the same thing. Countries and companies that operate within countries that sign the accord cannot own anything on the moon. But it doesn't say anything that individuals can't own things. So this guy, Richard Garrett is his name, owns that thing and the land it sits on the moon. He's the only person that owns something in space. I'm sure Musk is like really pissed off about that. Anyway, so if we, in this time that we're living in, and it's so tense, right? It was tense during the Cold War in 1979, at the height of the Cold War. The result of of our two countries barely speaking to each other in 75. Who was president? Right? It was Carter, and then it went into Reagan, right? Reagan came in 80, right? During this time, the height of the Cold War, we were barely speaking to each other as countries, and yet the scientists were speaking to each other to be able to couple these two spaceships. You wouldn't think that, given the rhetoric that we had, the political rhetoric that we had in both of our countries, the demonization of America by the Soviets and our fear and concerns about what the Soviets were doing and the inhumane practices that they had, for example. But here you have celebratory stamp of the Soyuz and Apollo from the Soviet Union, and you have the same kind of celebratory. So we have a role model, an example of how, even in times of political tension, that we can work together for greater good. And that's what that particular thing symbolized almost, well, yeah, it is 50 years ago.
Yeah, and of course, there's still spies in space in pop culture today. I'd say it's more than, you can't get away from it. Because Mission Impossible, right, just opened, and that's been going on for 30 years, not counting the TV shows before that, the TV seasons. So again, spies don't leave us, because the idea of pretend and spying and having secrets and holding and being like somebody you're not, and maybe like putting on that mask and being fearless. I think that's the reason we like Spies and Tom Cruise and all those guys in that, because they're fearless and they fight for the greater good. At least the good spies do, the ones we root for. And then space has never been bigger, I think partly because CGI and the ability to make great movies has never been grander or more fun. Anything you can imagine can be done now. And so you've got the Guardians of the Galaxy, and you've got a lot more of that kind of crazy stuff. And Bond continues on after how many, decades and decades and decades and decades. So we just finished with him. Do people know the Bonds up here? These are all the guys that have been James Bond.
How about this one? Does anybody know this top left?
That was Barry Nelson, an American who played James Bond in a British TV movie back in the 50s. And it was called Casino Royale, and Peter Lorre, if you know who he is, anybody? Peter Lorre was the bad guy.
Okay, next up, who's this? Okay, good. Who's this one?
There you go.
David Niven. How many movies was he in?
Anybody know the movie he was in? There you go, Casino Royale, that's right.
A one-hit wonder for poor David Niven.
There you go. Roger Moore, he was in a bunch of movies. Timothy Dalton, you're a Bond fan, I can tell. And there we go. Daniel Craig, our last Bond. And of course, just coming up, it's almost like, it's like picking the new Miss America. It's kind of like, who will be the next Bond? Oh my God, it's going to be so contentious. It's like, none of us remember, my mom always talks about who was going to be Scarlett O'Hara, back when she was a girl. And it's the same kind of thing. It's like, he is so much a part of our culture that whoever becomes Bond could change their career. And again, it's up in the exhibit. Some of the people who were considered for the first Bond, besides Connery, would have been a couple of people. Adam West, we all knew who he was. Okay. And then Cary Grant, Peter Lawford, and I think even Richard Burton. But they all said, oh wait, like a 3-movie deal? No, I don't want to be tied down. So they all blew it off. And then it took Connery to new heights to Sir Sean Connery.
All right, so we got some more spy toys.
Right, and so spy toys continue on. Again, a couple of crazy things I've noticed is when I was a kid, there wasn't so much do-it-yourself kits or spy toys. You had action figures, and they battled, and they got buried, or they got burned up, or whatever. But now you've got master detective toolkits, which are, again, part of the thing about, I just couldn't have done it, I wouldn't have been that smart. But then there's a kids lab up there. And Mission Impossible, of course, just never stops grinding them out. So you've got Ethan Hunt as a fireman. There's probably, look, authentic LASIK disguise mask. Wow, cool. And then, so these are all, and Harriet the Spy's been around for a long time, but again, kids like spies. Kids like to pretend. Kids, how many of us put on costumes as a kid? Halloween really is all about the pretend and the let's be somebody we're not. And spies are always doing that. And to gather secret information. And space is just going great guns because we're never going to stop looking to the stars to go, what's up there? Who's up there? When are they going to come down to say hi, good or bad? And what are we going to catch from up there, come down? So, you've got, who knows what this guy is from?
Toy Story.
Toy Story, right. Everybody understands what Martians are all about. We all know the thing. And Lego, I can't believe how, who remembers what Legos used to be? What were they? Just blocks. And then suddenly Lego went, wait a minute, they're probably building stuff and playing with their own toys in those blocks. We could just conquer the world and make all the series as we ever wanted to. And then you've just got, astronauts that are not going away anytime ever. And, we're going places and now it's, I like this little picture because it's got all the different stuff. If I was a real tech head, I could tell you each one of those and what happened to them.
You were looking at STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. Something that we don't do very well in this country in our educational system, but we're trying to introduce that through toys, through play. And if you go back to this one, this is part of what that is, right? So, edutainment, right? And then, for those of you that have smartphones and want to get a nice soundtrack, we have this soundtrack for you. So you can pull out your phones now if you like, scan that QR code, it'll take you over to Hulu, and you can listen to all these Peter Gunn, The Space Odyssey, Goldfinger. There are about 3 hours worth of songs there. All the different songs, theme songs, Mission Impossible, all kinds of things. So do it real quick because we're going to wrap up here.
I thought that was the last slide.
Well, then there you go.
Oh, there was the thank you slide.
I know. We have to thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. We made a slide.
All right. I'm Stephen. That's David. That's Peggy.